Welcome, listeners, to www.ironradio.org, the website and podcast for all things strength sports and sports nutrition. With your hosts, Lonnie Lowery.
Remember, Phil is like a gnarled old oak tree held together with scar tissue and bone spurs.
Rob Fortney.
And I'm telling you, the pain that I would suffer was beyond excruciating.
And Phil Stevens.
Do it, Rob. You'll kill all those nerves.
Thanks for listening. Welcome, IronRadio.org listeners. This is Lonnie Lowery. I'm an exercise physiology and sports nutrition professor of over 15 years, and I'm a former competitive bodybuilder.
And this is Phil Stevens. I'm a strength coach. I run Strength Guild, as well as, a bunch of other stuff. Strength Guild, Live for Hope. Just like I said, a lot of things. So I'm tired. I had about 2.5 hours of sleep. So.
We'll let you slide.
Yeah.
Ouch. This is Dr. Mike T. Nelson. I'm the owner of Extreme Human Performance, faculty member at the Carrick Institute, do online training and coaching, and I was in Costa Rica last week, which was pretty amazing. So
I saw some of your tweets about, I think they were from the jungle or something.
Yeah, they were from the jungle. We had an outdoor area. It was through Dr. Ben House at Functional Med Costa Rica. And it was pretty amazing, the place we stayed at. And where we were presenting was literally just a roof and a whiteboard or a screen. And you could see all the jungle in the background. It was all open air. And
wow.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing.
Indiana Jones of the fitness world.
Yeah, that's what it reminded me of. Because
Dr. Jones.
We actually had to crawl out of the jungle once on our hands and knees because it rained and the whole path turned to slippery mud, so we got to practice our sideways bear crawls.
I don't know if that's exotic or that just kind of sucks.
Yeah, it was one of those things where if you said, "Hey, this is what we're going to do today," I'd be like, "No, not a chance
right.
in hell." But once it happened, you're like, "This is kind of cool. When else am I ever going to do this?"
Yeah, it's like academic, and you get to run a Tough Mudder at the same time, kind of thing.
What a choice do you have?
Right. Yeah.
Might as well enjoy it.
Yeah.
We need to get you one of those shirts that says "For Science." All right.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Let's see what we've got here. We're going to start. I have two little bits of news. I know Phil's got some lifting industry news, and then we're going to get to our topic. The topic is going to be extreme diets. We'll talk about before we hit the record button, everyone, we were just talking about the cyclical nature of some of these things, these extreme diets. And in fact, last week, John, Mike, and I were just kind of talking similar, that so many of them have a big part of their mechanism of action is just the caloric deficit, when they're done right. But anyway.
Strength and muscle sport news.
This is a bit of listener mail, and it led us to news. So let's see. It says, "Hi, Dr. Lowery and the guys. This is John. Weight training. Let's see. Something about weight training is best, and interval training may be best for endurance. What you gentlemen always preach is codified here. I like the last sentence in this article that says, in fact, older people's cells responded in some ways more robustly to exercise than the cells of the young did, suggesting that it's never too late to benefit from exercise. So I ran with this, John, and I pulled up the New York Times article. This is by Gretchen Reynolds, and then I went and pulled the actual peer-reviewed one because everybody knows what I think about fitness and the science journalists, but and not all bad, of course, not all bad. The title of this from the New York Times was "The Best Exercise for Aging Muscles." It's essentially an exploration of different types of exercise. So it starts off saying the toll that aging takes on the body extends all the way down to the cell level. But the damage accrued by cells in older muscles is especially severe because they do not regenerate easily and they become weaker as their mitochondria, which produce energy, diminish in vigor and in number. So this is all about a study published this month in Cell Metabolism, and I will get to this. It's by Robinson et al. And they were talking about how exercise may undo some of what the years do to your mitochondrial powerhouses in your cells. So this is from Mayo, up there by you, Dr. Nelson.
Yes.
They took 72 healthy but sedentary men and women who were 30 years or younger, and then they compared them in part to those older than 64 years of age. After baseline measures were established for their aerobic fitness, their blood sugar levels, and gene activity, as well as mitochondrial health and muscle cells, the volunteers were randomly assigned to different exercise regimens. One did vigorous weight training several times a week. One did interval training, so sort of high-intensity interval training. And a group did moderate pace cycling, it looks like 30 minutes a few times a week. So I think they're trying to tease apart intensity, right? Whether it's aerobic intensity or even anaerobic in a sense, versus lighter stuff. And then they also look, of course, the age issue. It says after 12 weeks in general, everyone had improvements in fitness. All of them had better ability to handle blood sugar. That's not surprising to almost any of us, I think. It says more unexpected were the results from the biopsies. Those who did the high-intensity interval training, activity had changed in 274 genes, compared with 170 genes for those who did the more moderate exercise, and only 74 genes for the weightlifters. It says among the older cohort, almost 400 genes were working differently after 12 weeks. So they said, in a nutshell, at least in the journalist says, especially in the cells of interval trainers, there was a strong influence on the ability of mitochondria to produce energy. Let's see, they had both increase in number and in health of their mitochondria, and this was particularly pronounced in the older cyclists, the cycling interval training guys. So sort of nutshell, it seems as if the decline in cellular health of muscle associated with aging was quote-unquote corrected with exercise, especially if it was intense, says Dr. Sri Kumaran Nair, Dr. Nair, professor of medicine and an endocrinologist at the Mayo Clinic and the senior author. It says, in fact, older people's cells responded in some ways more robustly to intense exercise than the cells of the young did. So I thought that was cool. Thank you, John, for that. I actually put a picture up on Twitter and on our Facebook listeners page. It's a diagram that's straight out of this article. So I pulled the full article. Here it is. Robinson and colleagues, enhanced protein translation underlies improved metabolic and physical adaptations to different exercise modes in young and old humans. Here's the highlights. This is literally from the Cell Metabolism Journal webpage. Highlights: high-intensity interval training improved age-related decline in muscle mitochondria. 2, training adaptations occurred with increased gene transcripts and ribosome proteins. 3, changes to the message, right, the RNA, with training had little overlap with the corresponding protein abundance. Now, that's interesting. And again, this is described in the picture that I put up there, but listeners, if you're not familiar, right, the messenger RNA that's sent out from the nucleus once it's stimulated, ideally, right, you would think it would lead to some new protein being created, actin or myosin or some enzyme or something. And it doesn't look like it's an automatically causal thing. And I think a lot of us know that, right, in the sciences. Messenger RNA, the message can degrade. It always doesn't come to fruition properly. And then finally, enhanced ribosomal abundance. And again, think about ribosome factories. That's what's making the proteins your cell needs. And protein synthesis do explain the gains in mitochondria. So if you look at the summary just quickly, the molecular transducers of benefits from different exercise modes remain incompletely defined. We did show enhanced insulin sensitivity and enhanced lean mass, but only high-intensity interval training and combined training improved aerobic capacity and skeletal muscle. High-intensity interval training revealed a more robust increase in gene transcripts, right, so genes getting turned on, gene activity, than other exercise modalities. So the little diagram shows a little kind of runner dude on a treadmill and then a little weightlifter silhouette, little icon. And you know how the weightlifting, if it's not accompanied by high-intensity interval training, for example, you'll get hypertrophy, but you won't get necessarily as robust an effect on your mitochondria. And that kind of makes sense, right? I mean, if you're going to do cardio, it's going to help with the oxidative systems in your cells. I think this depends on how they had them resistance train too. And I did not look at that. But if you do train intensely, the rest periods between your intense bouts are fairly aerobic in nature, right? And so
Yeah, very aerobic.
Yeah. So but they're suggesting that resistance training by itself is more just a hypertrophic response as opposed to mitochondrial and other things. And it kind of shows how, your DNA gets stimulated, sends out the message to the ribosome factory, makes the cellular proteins that you need. So, and interesting stuff that in some ways it may actually benefit the older exercisers more. Pretty cool. The other one I've got here is from Twitter. Joey Antonio, who we know, a friend of the show, Dr. Antonio, co-founder of the International Society of Sports Nutrition. He's been promulgating this one: whey protein hydrolysis and branched-chain amino acids downregulate inflammation. Downregulate, in fact, inflammation-related genes in vascular endothelial cells. So it says a recent review of clinical studies reports that dairy products may improve inflammation. It's controversial, however, which proteins are at work here, the whey versus the casein. In this particular review of other studies, and again, this is nutrition research. This is brand new stuff, spanking new. Specifically, the impact of whey proteins, either isolate or hydrolysate, versus caseins versus amino acids. It says the whey hydrolysate, as well as the branched-chain amino acids, leucine, isoleucine, and valine, attenuated tumor necrosis alpha-induced inflammation. Interesting. This effect was not observed in unstimulated cells, so again, they have to be sort of irritated, I think. It says, oppositely, casein and a whey-casein mixture aggravated some of this inflammation. So not quite as good news for the casein, I guess, or the whey-casein mixture, which was a 1-to-4 mix of whey and casein. Also, glutamine aggravated TNF inflammation. Then it muddies the waters a little. It says caseins did have, I'm not going to bore you with the specifics, but caseins did have some anti-inflammatory effects in other variables. So taken together, this study shows whey proteins and their major amino acids normalize TNF alpha-induced pro-inflammatory gene expressions in endothelial cells. So, neat. I mean, it makes sense in some ways. Yeah. I never thought about whey protein. I guess think about it like how many different reasons do you need to consume whey protein, I think, at this point. Muscle protein synthesis, anti-inflammatory, anti-hypertensive. The list just goes on. So,
yeah, I saw something recently that was something like 5 or 7 ways like not to, or reasons why not to use whey protein, and I couldn't get through all of it because it's pretty much the direct opposite of everything I thought.
Oh, nice. Yeah, so that's what I've got from the science news. Phil, you said, what did you say? There's a shitstorm coming up, or something's happening in the lifting industry?
Well, we have this weekend is I don't want to mess up the title of it. The CET-CUS Open. So it's a USPA meet. It's pretty much the biggest, the USPA 2017 US Open. Gracie V out in San Diego is running it. This is the meet JP did last year. And went out there and won a few $1,000s. They upped the ante this year. They're giving away, it was $300,000. I think it's $200,000 now.
Wow.
Really? That's got to be a record, isn't it?
Yeah.
Powerlifting?
Yeah, that's big money. So basically, you had to be the top 10 in the world to get an invite. And basically, they're giving away $35,000 to each class. So, for instance, Open Men Classic Raw is $35,000 with the best. The first place taking home $15,000, second place $10,000, third place $5,000, on down. So yeah, it's a nice chunk of money. They had a few lifters back out. Some of the Russians and Zahir just backed out like this week, last minute. Ben Moore's out there. JP didn't go. He got hurt like 6 months ago and pulled out. So he's doing great now, but he's rehabbing, just not in shape to be out there. it's going to be interesting. This thing is going to be. There's been big promises. Talking to other people in the industry, there's been big promises of big money in the past, and the issue has been, well, when it came time to cut the check.
Then some people never got paid. I know. So
yes, exactly. And the hard thing about this is it's like so she had an event last year, and it was a spectacle for sure, and they gave away a good amount of money, a few $1,000s to do a powerlifting meet is good money.
Yeah.
You bump it up to this type of money, and you're talking huge money, and she's got some backing in this and that. They rented a fairgrounds. From what I hear, she's selling booths for the same price as you buy them at the Arnold.
Wow.
Yeah, which is, I don't know. I've heard good and bad about that. I mean, some people are like, why am I going to pay the same price for the Arnold?
Yeah,
to go to a powerlifting.
Worth it, but I don't know.
Depends on how many people they get to show up.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. I mean, this thing, I don't know. I got to give it up to her. She's going out there and doing it. And she stepped up, and it's either going to be a really amazing thing or a really amazingly bad thing. So one of the two.
Right.
They're selling a live stream, and I don't know how she got them, but I mean they had an ad with Chuck Norris on there talking about the live stream.
Really?
Yeah. So all these people pushing the live stream out there, which who knows, maybe if they can get, at $10, get 50,000 people to sign up for that, well, there's your money.
Yep.
So we'll see. That'll be interesting to see. So they've got a hell of a roster. There's not quite 10 in each class. Like I said, some of them backed out, but some huge names.
And you said this is all over the world, right? Not just U.S.
Yeah. So you had to be top 10 as far as Powerlifting Watch, and then any international lifters that are in feds that aren't covered by Powerlifting Watch, basically you had to send in an application to her.
Okay.
And just basically just to prove that you have the ability that these other people do. Like Ben, he's pulling over 8 and squatting over 9, I think, and so I mean it's the best of the best.
Yeah, serious. Yeah.
Right now. So. And,
what's the date of it, Phil?
It's today.
Oh, it's today. Oh,
today
wow.
and tomorrow. So.
Today and tomorrow.
Yep, today and tomorrow going on. So that'll be interesting if anybody watches. I'm sure there's people listening that are going to be watching the feed. So it'll be interesting. I'm sure I'll get updates this whole time via Ben and them. So
right
out there, see how he does. I know his trainings went well, and
nice.
There's 8 women lifters, and so it's stacked across the board. The women lift tomorrow. The guys lift today. They start early at like 8 o'clock or something like that.
Oh man.
Yeah, and I don't know. I think it's like $50 to get in.
I feel bad about saying this might be a shitstorm. I guess that my comment was about. Let's see what happens, right? Because if this is a bait and switch, like we have all this money, they draw out the big names, they get Chuck Norris involved, everything else, and then we don't really have the money,
The only thing I've seen is the talk like that from people, and it's I'm being 100% honest on here. It's like when we sat down and did the math, we're like, where the hell's the money coming from? And generally, I don't care who you have backing you. People that have that kind of money to back you aren't doing it out of the kindness of their heart.
No, they're not doing it to take a loss.
They're going to give away $300,000 to bring back 500.
Right. Oh yeah, it's business.
So that's just what business is. So we'll see. I mean, I hope this thing works out amazingly. It would be great for the sport.
Oh, that'd be pretty awesome.
I mean, of course, it draws in people from all over the place. I mean, $15,000 is a nice chunk of money here. If you live in like the Ukraine, holy crap! Yeah.
Right. Depressed economy.
Yeah. You just did your work for the year, so
that'd be brilliant.
So I hope it pulls off well, and it'll be interesting to see the updates coming in.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I get tired of hearing how much money is in basketball and stuff that I don't really care about much, really. Those guys, they're fussing. Oh, I only got $46 million in my contract. Really, man? Because I guess all I'm saying is for those people, if they're like, oh, don't be dissing basketball. Well, listen, I get it, right? And resistance training is a part of that sport. Some people call it a big man sport, stuff like that. I get it. But just the massive discrepancy. It'd just be nice to see lifters pulling that kind of money. Like, I'm just not that excited watching somebody, shove a ball into a little red hoop.
Yeah.
I rather watch someone pull some heroic amount of iron off the ground. But again, that's weird to other people. So
For sure. And it's interesting. They broke up the prize money, so it's not just it's done on coefficient, of course, but there's heavy and lightweight, so it's not lightweights going against heavies, which is usually always the bitch at meets when they pick out best lifter.
yeah,
If it's a light guy, then all the big guys are harping that it's always the light guy that wins the coefficient, or and the opposite.
the ratio is off.
Yeah. So they broke it up. It's over 198 and under 198. Each group gets $35,000. So,
That's brilliant.
yeah, and then I think there's also prizes for like best bench and 500 here, 1,000 there.
I like that. I like that sort of achievement type things where they can pick out not just the single, like one heavyweight champion, but like who's got the biggest bench, and I love it.
And then if you win your weight class, you get If you win your weight class, you get $1,000. So even if you don't get coefficient, but you won your weight class, you get money. And second and third place too get money.
Yeah, you can see the bills sort of building up quickly here.
Yeah, you do math and it's like, ooh, that's a lot of cash.
Yeah,
and I'm sure renting the freaking fairgrounds, the Del Mar Fairgrounds, was not cheap.
Yeah.
So,
we'll see. We'll see what happens.
I mean, we'll see. I hope it pulls off well and turns into a great event for years to come. With maybe even bigger money.
Right.
It'd be nice to see that. It's going to draw more people to the sport. So
good.
Good
All
luck,
right.
Ben.
Yeah.
Pick up heavy things and don't hurt yourself.
I just have one other study here too, if you're ready. Basically, you guys will find this interesting. It was the influence of omega-3 fatty acids on skeletal muscle protein metabolism and mitochondrial bioenergetics in older adults. So basically, is your fish oils possibly anabolic in older individuals? And the takeaway is that they seem to hint that it might be. The study is from, studies from Aging. Main author is actually from the Mayo, which is down the road here in Minnesota. And the cool part about the study is that they actually looked at the levels, so blood levels of omega-3, so EPA and DHA specifically. So those are the fish oils. And they also looked at compliance at the end of the study. So they remeasured blood levels. They actually even measured RBC content, so red blood cell content, to make sure that people were actually compliant with it and that type of thing. It wasn't necessarily a training outcome study per se. They looked at a lot of different molecular things related to mitochondria, looked at ROS production, different things like that. They did look at fractional synthetic rate for protein metabolism, and they used about 4-gram dose of EPA plus DHA, and they did that for about 4 months. So pretty long study,
high
dose.
Yeah.
So I thought that was actually pretty interesting. Now, we don't know if that applies to healthy younger people. Some other data stating maybe, but that was only if you really whacked them with a ton of insulin and that type of glucose at the same time for an acute effect. But maybe we'll see more things in that area trying to combat some of the anabolic resistance.
I find that curious because there was speculation years ago, and it was just speculation that fish oils might blunt muscle protein synthesis in the young. Right, because of I think it's through some prostaglandin E2 mechanism, some cellular pathway, it was going to blunt anabolism. So this
it was turning down the inflammatory process too much.
Yeah.
Right, because you need that balance of inflammatory and anti-inflammatory.
Yes. And listeners, if you want to be confused shitless, look into inflammation and antioxidant versus free radical kinds of metabolism, because you need the sweet spot of these things. You need enough inflammation and oxidative stress to get results, adaptations. You don't want to blunt it completely. I think this might be one of those ones where the older guys and gals, it might be almost opposite. where it's helping.
Oh, could be.
It's helping with the older and maybe not as much with the young. I will say this though, all that speculation about fish oils being anti-anabolic, as it were, in the younger people, I never bought that much because there's just too many jacked guys taking fish oils, right?
Yeah.
So, I don't know.
Yeah. And again, when you realize that most people are super low in, so I use an at-home essential fatty acid testing kit through omega-3 tests through Doug Bilvis, and the testing I've looked at over the last 5 years, I think I've had 2 people that were probably in a pretty okay, range. We look at blood and red blood cell content, even in people who are taking fish oil. So most people are still kind of walking around probably more on the deficient side,
Agreed.
or that their omega-6 is still much higher than their omega-3.
Yes, right. Yep, absolutely. Hey, I should make, since this is also aging related, I was remiss I didn't mention this too. When John sent me that stuff from the New York Times, I had just yesterday had a conversation in the gym about this, about older lifters, basically. A guy said, "Hey, are you dieting for a show?" And I said, "Oh, no. My joints won't. I can't lift heavy enough to do this well." I remember a comment, Phil, you made years ago about if you want to do something, you want to be freaking good. Now you got to take into account surgeries and age and all that other stuff. But in that sense, I think in some ways bodybuilding differs from powerlifting, but taking nothing from the older bodybuilders. But anyway, the point was, I said, yeah, I dropped about 17 pounds. I pulled some fat out of my diet, because I had been pulling carbs out, but I was eating plentiful, healthy fats. I mentioned last week, I think. I pulled that out. I dropped quite a bit of weight, and I am getting leaner. I've got to decide how twinky I want to get. I'm down to 196 now. But then the conversation turned. I said, "Oh yeah, I blew out my knee last summer, and getting old just kind of sucks." And he said, "How old are you?" I said, "Well, I'm 48." And he goes, "Yeah, I'm 51." And this guy does not look like he's 51. I mean, he's not ripped. He's not in shape in that way. He's strong. He's just a heavily built guy. If anything, he's carrying a little bit of extra body fat. But then we started talking about how the old guard in the gym, you would never guess, I think, that all of us are hovering around 50 plus or minus 5 years. They're compared to the guys up and down my street, all these guys look so young. I mean, yeah, you might have the scar tissue, you might be stiff in the joint, longer to warm up, that kind of stuff. But when you just look at them, I've got people up and down my block, and he was saying the same thing. They're in their mid-30s, early 30s, and they look older than we do. So all this stuff about turning on the right genes and supplying the right nutrients, the lifestyle adds up. It really does.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's just kind
especially
of
I think when you're looking sort of, not to be on a downer, but that far into the future, right? If you're 25, you can probably abuse yourself pretty bad and still be okay, but you keep doing that for another couple decades, and it's going to add up.
It's a good point. And our lifters, if you're a 30 or 40 something, I know we have quite a few, and I know the young guys are like, oh God, the old farts are at it again. But if you're middle aged, yeah, I mean, I saw some interesting stuff years ago when I was up in Minnesota. Actually, they were saying how the importance of some of these prostate cancer reducing nutrients, like in tomatoes and whatnot. It may be especially important to get them in your middle years, because some of these diseases start to happen when, frankly, you're old enough to manifest your genetic blueprint, and so you're trying to keep this stuff in check. So, okay, last up before we go to break, and Dr. Nelson leads us through a discussion on extreme diets. I just wanted to say thank you to the following supporting members. We very much appreciate you guys. You keep the lights on, right? This is important stuff. We are a public radio format, and when I mention this verbally, I think people tune out the mid-show announcements or at the end, so I want to give credit where it's due. Corey, Jacob, Daniel, Reuven, Christopher, and Douglas. You're on my list, and again, I just do this. I check out my phone, the most recent sort of report from our supporting members, and I know there are some people who make one-time donations and that sort of thing. You are appreciated, folks, because otherwise there is so much crap in the fitness industry. I mean, I can't even listen to a lot of the podcast. I mean, some of them are well-meaning, but god dang it, I'm just cringing when I have to turn them off. And that's so judgmental. It's not, like my wife always says, good thing we're perfect, kind of joking. But, oh my goodness. it can be so bad. So thank you guys for supporting some evidence-based stuff, and it's, I don't know, it makes me happy.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to go to break. When we come back, we'll talk about diets. Hey listeners, this is Dr. Lonnie Lowry. If you've ever had anyone critique you on your protein intake as part of your weightlifting lifestyle, oh, you poor meathead, all that extra protein is going to rot your kidneys or weaken your bones or dehydrate you or give you gout or who knows what. There is a book available. You could simply Google CRC Press and Lowry. And what I've done is reach out to experts all over the world and create a book, a single compendium that you can hold up and say, this is why I consume extra protein. This can be very valuable when you're being quote-unquote educated by various professionals on the topic. There's an enormous amount of literature in this book on the safety, the effectiveness, how protein works in cells, the history of protein and weight trainers, much more. So again, please check out CRC Press and Protein and Lowry. You can just Google that, and I do, full disclosure, I do make a small single-digit royalty on the book, but that's not why I did it. I did it so we can all have something, our particular population, to both defend what we do and to inform our nutrition and our eating. Thanks. Iron Radio is, of course, primarily a podcast. But over the years, there have been technical glitches calling for backup streaming and listeners who wanted the convenience of other sources of audio content. Toward this end, Iron Radio is now simulcast and backed up on YouTube. If needed, please search Lawnman07 or Iron Radio from within YouTube. There's not much video, but if you like to listen through YouTube on a Roku or other living room device, there you go.
Like your weekly fix of Iron Radio? In addition to being a popular institute on iTunes, we are also on email. Simply go to www.ironradio.org and sign up for the voluntary email. You'll get a once per week email, no more. That's little more than the show notes and a link to the audio. So go for it.
Hey, what's going on? It's Dr. Mike T. Nelson here on Iron Radio with Dr. Lonnie Lowry, Coach Phil Stevens. And this week, in the topic, we're talking about the sort of extreme diet approach and sort of the extremeness in the fitness industry in general. All of us have been around for quite a while, and I'm sure a lot of the listeners have too. And you just see that, in general, moderation never really becomes popular. And it's interesting to see how everything will switch from one side to the other side. So even a few years ago, low carbohydrate diets were kind of popular, I would say. And then we had the low fat, and then now we're kind of going back to more high fat. Carbohydrates are evil. More of the almost ketogenic type diet will solve everybody's issues. And if you look at all the stuff, it's been around for quite a while. I remember the first time I ever read about ketogenic diets was cyclic ketogenic diet approach, where you had, I think the Zampano originally had, 10-day template, I think. And then I think Lyle shortened it to a 7-day template. But you'd basically be more ketogenic for a fair amount of time. You'd have your 1 or 2 sort of carb up days. And I think the idea was a good one at its heart. Trying to increase the use of fat, but still use carbohydrates. And I remember trying it, and I was utterly freaking miserable, other than the 2 high carb up days. And now you fast forward to some of the data, and there's not that much published on a cyclic ketogenic diet. So going from super high fat, low carbs to, a couple days of extremely high carbohydrates, it just seems like you end up in this metabolic sort of no man's land, where those 5 days, maybe you just kind of get into a ketogenic state towards the end. So your body is using ketones kind of as an alternate fuel when you feel pretty good. And then you have a whack ton of carbohydrates, and that kind of knocks you out of that for about the next 4 days or so. So what are your guys' thoughts on sort of the extremes approach?
Well, like you said, it's back again.
Yeah.
It just reminds me of the what's going on with keto right now reminds me of the Atkins craze.
Yep, that was very big for a while.
Where it blew up.
Really
yeah,
did
I don't
blow
know.
up.
I mean, I like it. I mean, I think it works for a lot of people, especially for Gen Pop.
Yes.
People that aren't athletes. And, I'm a big fan of Mauro Di Pasquale's The Anabolic Diet. And I think the biggest problem with it is everybody reads, and it's the same thing as the frickin' Atkins book. Everybody reads like the first 18 pages. They read chapter 1 and don't go any further.
Yeah.
And they stay at 20 grams a day. And, Mauro goes deep into, okay, now you've gone through that. Now it's time to find your own personal carb level, which might be 50, might be 200. Mm-hmm. It's finding the level that you personally with your, genetic code or whatever, but also your activity level perform the best. And he goes into how being in ketosis is actually overrated. He's just worried about you being leaner. He's not so worried about being in ketosis, and it's just finding to get non-technical and more meatheadish, finding the level of carb intake you can have without that spillover into not just refilling muscle glycogen and liver glycogen and stuff like that, and it's spilling over into fat stores.
Right. That sounds like bodybuilding. Like in the last week of a bodybuilding show, you'll hear guys say, don't go over, like, some people say 250, some will say 350 grams a day, because then instead of just getting muscle glycogen refilling, you quote unquote overspill in meathead talk, like you said, and then you just feel like you're drifting into I don't know if it's either fat synthesis or water retention under your skin, extracellular fluid, whatever it is, but it doesn't seem that advantageous to go too high, whereas the marathon runner, they can wig out on 9 grams per kg, and they don't care about any kind of cosmetic stuff.
And I mean, I think those diets like that one in and of itself are all very solid. It's just people are too lazy to actually take the time to figure it out.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I've seen even Mauro stuff for them. I mean, the guy obviously is extremely intelligent, and he put a ton of thought into it, was way ahead of everybody else. But I've even seen people take his approach, and like you said, I don't think it's necessarily what he wrote, and then said, oh, well, I got to be extremely high on carbs here, and then if I go more extreme and be more ketogenic during those phases, that'll be even better. And it's like, well, that's really how it was intended.
Everybody ends up being like at 5 grams every day during the week, and then they get 7,000 on one day.
Right. Right.
It's somewhere in between.
I think we get bogged down in the mechanism of action. I mean, some of the cyclical stuff, like, are you after specific cell adaptations? We talked about this a couple of months ago, I think. I was showing some video lectures in my classroom, and we were talking about this. Are you after inducing some of the fat-burning machinery in your cells, or is it just something that's more behavioral, and you're really what you're doing, like you're saying, Mike, if you're waffling back and forth too rapidly, I think you tend to miss out on some of the adaptations maybe, but behaviorally you're still in like a negative calorie balance. When I talk to guys backstage, they're like, they won't touch a gram of carbs all week long. Then they'll literally eat a chocolate cake or a whole pizza on Saturday, and you think, oh man, you're in such storage mode. The enzymes, LPL, all this stuff is just in place to store every gram of that. But then from a calorie balance perspective, there's no way that chocolate cake, spread it out over the whole last week, like you said, Phil, where they're eating 5 grams of carbs a day, it's still way negative, of course, across the week, But let me offer, this is my thoughts on this stuff. It always comes up like, do I pull carbs or fats out of my diet, Yeah. And when I've done Gen Pop weight management, you're left with, nobody's going to do biopsies and look at whether or not they're inducing more or less pyruvate dehydrogenase or something. So I mean, family history is one. I mean, if you have a family history of metabolic syndrome, so pre-diabetes, that's 1 in 3 Americans now. It's not likely if you're fit, but I'm just talking about getting an indirect estimate of your propensity, right, to handle carbs. Family history could be one. If you have family history of metabolic syndrome or type 2 diabetes, you may be a poorer carbohydrate handler yourself. And then those are the people you hear very vocally online, like carbs are evil, stay away from carbs. It's like, well, for you, they are. Like Phil, you were saying with your genetic, family history is, we've done that in nutrition and dietetics for decades, because there are some things that have a strong genetic component. Another one would be your subjective response to a high glycemic, fast-acting meal. I can tell you, my grandmother had type 2 diabetes. She was very overweight. My siblings are overweight. Well, not all of them, but most of them. And if I eat a big bowl of Lucky Charms, and I love that stuff, but I will get so sleepy and so fatigued, I'm wondering if I'm metabolizing that well. That didn't happen when I was in my 20s. But now it does. So I can't do that kind of stuff. Or if you really want to get fancy, I know, Mike, you and I have done this with people in the past or ourselves, is you can even just go buy a glucometer and do a finger prick. What's your morning blood sugar before you have breakfast? If it's in the upper 90s or a little over 100, that's not a good sign that you're handling carbs very well right now. Maybe your training volume is low, whatever it is. Or you could even give yourself a glucose challenge, One of the things I do in the classroom is I have people, I'll sort of emphasize the blood sugar swings. I'll give somebody a serving of red beans or an apple, and we'll do finger pricks, like every 30 minutes. And you see how nice and low that blood sugar response is. Then I give somebody else 2 to 4 pieces of white bread, and you could watch it spike, But you could even do that in yourself. Like if you're really sore, you could be slightly carbohydrate intolerant. Sore muscles don't take up carbohydrates very well. I think that's where bodybuilders really started demonizing carbs, is when you're sore all the time, you have a certain relative amount of glucose intolerance. Your blood sugars might run a little higher, your insulin might be a little higher because your muscles are sore. They're kind of damaged. I mean, Ivy did some of that stuff, Kevin Yarshevsky, Della Guila. You could just go down a list of people who have done this sore muscles all the time. They do interfere with glucose tolerance and glycogen deposition. You could look at your training volume. If your volume is not real high, you're walking the gym, and literally like 15 reps later you leave because you're doing heavy work. That's not a ton of volume, You could look at whether you're getting a pump or not. Again, all crude and indirect ways to assess this, but maybe those are reasons to pull out the carbs instead of the fat. But then I can tell you at 9 calories per gram, fats add up fast on the energy balance side of things too. So at least for me, I found that I had to really address both. I couldn't just pull out the carbs and magically get ripped. So,
and a lot of it, when you look at stuff too, I think I've seen some interesting meal plans from unnamed people. And if you were to try to actually cook real food, right, so translate their macros into actual food they're going to eat, it's like if anyone's tried to consume less than 30 grams of fat total in a day, it's horrible. Like you're eating egg whites and lettuce, and because, it adds up over time. Same thing if you're trying to dramatically reduce, carbohydrates. So I think a lot of it has to be what's also practical for that person. If you've got a big lifter trying to eat over 4,000 calories and you're saying you have to keep your fat under 50 grams, that's incredibly difficult.
Oh, yeah. Fortress used to say that. Like, he said, how much broccoli and brown rice do I have to eat? Right. It's like, well, it's because it's broccoli and brown rice, bro. Break out the brownies.
Yeah.
I mean, in that case, if you're trying to crash through barriers, geez.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then one other thing, too, is that they actually have a 14-day glucose device you can wear now. We played with these a little bit in Costa Rica last week, and it'll it's just a little tiny needle that sits in the interstitial fluid and does a sample every 15 minutes. And while the accuracy is not super good, it's primarily designed more for diabetics. You need a physician to sign off on it, but they'll still send it to you. It's super interesting. We had a bunch there and looked at just different trends and just looked how different people respond to the same thing, right? So some people like the pineapple were like freaking off the charts. Other people, no big deal, really. So you just kind of see it the next level down, kind of that variability over the course of many days, too.
Yeah, I love the 24-hour glucose monitoring. I used to have a couple of glucose, they're called gluco watches, and it's now a defunct technology. But
Similar idea, but yeah.
Yeah, but I can tell you, when they get Fitbits to the point that they can use some type of electrophoresis, or they can somehow draw just enough interstitial fluid without scratching the hell out of my wrist.
That's what this one does, yeah.
Yeah, then I'm all about it. My students are always laughing. They're like, "You're such a curmudgeon, Dr. Lowry." But until I can get some metabolic stuff like the 24-hour glucose monitoring, I'm bored. Yeah. I'm bored with Fitbits. I just want more out of them. But when you look at how they're micro-miniaturizing so many pieces of lab equipment, I think it's on the horizon. And when that happens, damn right I'm going to buy one of those. But, yeah, I want some metabolic input, too, not just an accelerometer telling me how much I move or how much whether it's sleeping or whatever. But, yeah.
I think as the data gets better, if you look at, there's a couple pieces of data now looking at insulin and even glucose. If you take a piece of equipment that's super accurate and you start doing multiple draws, right? So, like if you leave an IV in someone, you just start pulling blood samples every minute or something like that, even for growth hormone, stuff like that. Excluding the lab costs it takes to currently run all of that. But what you find is that all of that stuff is way more variable from second to second, minute to minute than we believe that it currently is.
Right, pulsatile, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, any endocrinologist will tell you that.
Pattern was kind of the next area once we get the technology there.
Yeah, it's cool stuff. Yeah, and that could give you insight. I know you're a big monitor guy. You like to monitor people's physiology. Yeah, and once we get to that point, I think that's where it would just give someone information about, like you were saying, how they respond to different carbohydrates or higher fat or lower carb meal. How easily do you get in ketosis? We were just talking about that a little. I remember Cass Forsyth saying, "My God, I cannot get into ketosis." And I think a lot of lifters, they don't because they have too much protein in their diet.
Yes.
I'd love to get Jeff Volek on because he's one of those low carb for life kinds of guys, and he's one with the scientific acumen to back it up. And I would love to get his input because he's powerlifter, professor, and he's always ripped. So it's just curious stuff, but there's no doubt this stuff is cyclical. Yeah, things come and go.
I think what's the trade-off too, right? So I have some clients who have used a ketogenic diet. I'm not against it. I think it, like Phil was saying, depends on your goals and what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
But if they're saying, hey, I'm going to go do, CrossFit or some high-intensity stuff 5 days a week.
Volume. Yeah.
Ketogenic diet's the last thing I'm probably going to recommend for them. One, they don't need it. It's sometimes harder to get enough variety. And most of them, they're doing a sport that's extremely high glycolytic carbohydrate based. So restricting the thing that they're trying to use during their sport performance is not the place I would start.
Yeah. I think it's worth pointing out to listeners that that classic crossover effect, it's easily demonstrable in the laboratory. You exercise at a moderate pace, no problem. You don't really feel that much fatigue. You're sort of non-panting, middle pace for a young person, like a heart rate around 120-ish maybe. But like you said, when you ramp up the intensity to any appreciable degree, unless it's very, very brief and without much volume, you cross over to carbohydrates. Those are the pathways that are fast enough to supply it, the energy to do it. And so how can you not have that fuel and expect to be just as powerful across a workout? It just doesn't seem logical to me. But I don't know. People talk about how magical, once you're fat adapted and how well you can actually use ketones when you give your body no choice. So it's, like I said, I'd like to have Dr. Volek on so I could sort of dig into that, because that just kind of goes against everything I was ever taught, that you can just eschew the carbohydrates and still be super powerful across any kind of volume. I don't know about that.
Yeah, and if you look at Volek's FASTER study, which is an amazing study, took highly adapted people to fat ketogenic, most of them were, and they did find that the rate of fat oxidation was higher than had ever been reported in any textbook. They did find that glycogen levels in general were pretty good, but the problem I don't think is necessarily what substrate is present, it's what substrate do you have access to. And we do know that Stillingworth has shown this and a couple other people that long-term use of like a ketogenic high-fat diet does result in PDH enzyme changes and can prevent you from using carbohydrates to the highest degree. So if you take those athletes and measure, strength and power, especially vertical jump, things of that nature, pretty much every case they're actually down quite a bit.
Right. Yep.
So if you want to kind of sacrifice that and you just want to up your average speed or power, or I should say pace is probably more accurate, then that may be worth it. But even during long races, I think I was saying before, I was a volunteer for the Race Across America several years ago. We're in the middle of like Colorado, and you're still having to do hill passes, day 3 into a 24-hour-a-day race. So even on something that's, starting in San Diego, finishing in Atlantic City, it's about as long endurance race as you can get. You still have periods of time where you have to have speed and power. There's no drafting, so you still have to be able to pass someone, so create a fair amount of high power to get by them. So it's pretty rare that you're always going to have a race where it's just going to be a high output steady state.
Right. I guess to me it comes down to across the course of a workout, right? Like,
correct.
Like if you're like, listen, I'm an Olympic lifter. I punch it up once. I walk away. I'll come back in a couple of minutes. Okay, but then
that might be all right.
Yeah, as opposed to steady state like what a cyclist might do. But yeah, I would still argue across the course of a workout, it'd be very difficult. You know what? And we've actually had listeners write in and be like, they're explaining why they're so into the fat adapted thing, and I'm not sure all of them understand on a mechanistic level what's happening in a cell. Like you're saying, when you don't have that linchpin between glycolysis and the rest of your energy systems, how do you tap the carbohydrates there very rapidly? It's just important to note that we're so used to thinking that hormones control our response to food, but food controls hormones, and hormones affect the outcome of different genes. So nutrigenetics is a thing. You do turn on the expression of different parts of your metabolic pathways with the way you eat, and like Phil said, there's genetic differences there too. So it's I don't know, it might be good to participate in a study like that if anybody has a chance to, because we keep reporting averages of people. But yeah, some of these things I think are more or less metabolic truths. So
yeah, and to me, obviously, I'm biased towards metabolic flexibility, is that I don't think unless you get on the extreme ends of both spectrums, you necessarily have to pick carbohydrates or only have to pick fat. You can upregulate fatty acid use pretty high in most people, and if it's done correctly, not impair your body's ability to use carbohydrates. If you get out on the extremes, at that point maybe you will. But we also know that there's a couple studies that were done with just people, they grabbed them and shoved them on a metabolic cart and said, hey, during low intensity exercise, how well are you using fat? Helge did one, I did one, Gadecki did one. And what they showed was about 20 to 90% variation just under low intensity fasted exercise, how well people already are able to use fat. And you talk to anyone, like we've said this before, Lonnie, if you're looking at the metabolic cart, you have a few people that come in that are using a lot of carbohydrates just during their warm-up, like after they get through the accommodation phase.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of room in most people to increase the body's ability to use fat, and you don't necessarily have to sacrifice their, weight training or performance either.
Right on. That's that old school bodybuilding approach, which is fasted, like pre-breakfast, light. It's not even cardio. Calorie drain, fat-specific calorie drain, and then you eat your carbs, you eat your oatmeal, and you go lift, kind of thing, and stimulate both kinds of systems. It just makes sense, I guess. But
what are your thoughts, Phil?
I agree. I'm half asleep there, guys.
Yeah,
it's the day. My job as a coach is to, I look at the individual's weaknesses, what's wrong with them, or the individual's problems, and we address those. I can't address everybody the same way.
Yeah. If you could, you'd walk in your gym and you'd give everyone the same damn template and be like, hey, be on your way. I'm going to eat donuts and hang out at home.
Yeah, that said, I've cured people with type 2 diabetes by having them go low carb for extended periods of time. So
increase muscle activity.
That was our goal. Our goal wasn't to make them jacked and a super athlete. It was let's get you healthy first, and then we adjust from there. So.
Yeah, I think the problem with the fitness industry and the extreme diets, just to sort of pull this back to the beginning, is the people, they desperately want to believe something. Neil deGrasse Tyson has a great quote about, before you try to assert a truth, make sure it's not something you desperately want to be true. And the most vocal people in our industry are the ones who they're very bought into something, and they're not willing to be neutral enough, and scientific enough to weigh evidence on both sides very fairly and not try to cherry pick and not try to take their own personal, it works for me, so it'll work for you. That's not the case, and then they get so vocal about it and they start arguing about it. And real scientists, it's fairly hard to argue with somebody who's philosophically got his head into science, right? Because I remember back in the day they were going to have Scott Connolly debate protein stuff with Pete Lemon, my old advisor. You can't debate anything with Pete. He's like, oh, that's an interesting point. Here's what I've seen. What have you seen? And that's what we need to do. But that's not how people act in our industry. It's always the two extremes that are the most vocal, and like you said, Mike, moderation doesn't sell.
And I like the Neil deGrasse Tyson. I listened to the interview. I think it was on Joe Rogan, and he was saying, he's like, I don't debate people. He's like, I'll educate people and I'll tell them what I believe that the current science and what we think is true. But he's like, it's not my job to try to figure out who's better with words versus somebody else.
Right. Yep.
I thought was an interesting perspective.
Yeah, it shouldn't have to be a contest in that way. Like you're trying to prove your point. And that's a problem in our industry, though, is people, they try to find their niche, and the niches are disappearing. So it's harder and harder to find something that is very unique. And, they latch on to one kind of diet. It could be the gluten-free diet, or I was reading stuff about yeast-related diets. And there's all these different things, and all of them have a kernel of truth. You just need to look at them very objectively instead of trying to just spin one of them into a career. Because if you do that too much, you come up with your book. We've said this before, you can't discredit your own book, you'll hurt your sales, So maybe that's why we're public supported, with this podcast. We don't have to sell one idea at the expense of all others. So, all right, good stuff, guys.
Yeah, very cool.
Well, thank you, Dr. Nelson. Yep, and thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Yeah, catch up with you next time.
Have a good one.
All right. See you guys.
Hey listeners, have you seen the store at IronRadio.org? There are 3 halls in the store. One for Phil, one for Fortress, and one for myself, Dr. Lowry, and they're thematic. So you can go into our Halls of Iron store and choose based on your goal. If you need something to learn or read or something nutritional, you can look in my store, Lonnie's store. If you want something about injury prevention or competition, then take a look at Phil's Hall of Iron. And if you want something about motivation or daily training, Fortress's Hall has what you're looking for. There are some fun, heroic descriptors as you browse through the stores. We try to make it a little more fun than the average boring online store. And whether you're a novice lifter or someone more experienced, you can take heart that you're not wasting your time. The things that we put in each Hall of Iron are actually based on our own recommendations. Protein powders that we know to be good, knee sleeves, wraps of some kind, things that Fortress uses in his own training. The stuff you see, is good. This way you don't waste time. So check out the Iron Radio store at ironradio.org and let us know what you think on the forums, and certainly you can request products and we will screen them before they go in. So thanks for listening.
Iron Radio is accepting donations. If you like what we do, the professors, the scientists, the bodybuilding show promoters, the athletes themselves in powerlifting and bodybuilding, please consider making a donation or maybe buying something from the IronRadio.org store. We also are accepting supporting members. So for $4 a month, which is frankly less than the bank sneaks out of your account in fees, you can step up and support a form of sort of public radio for the bodybuilding and powerlifting and strength community. The Iron Radio podcast and all of the audio on ironradio.org is for informational purposes only. If you're interested in starting a diet or exercise program, it's important to check with your physician. Also seek the help of registered dietitians, athletic trainers, and qualified exercise physiologists in order to make the progress that you need.